Congregational United Church of Christ. So that's kind of why I'm interested, although it's certainly because I am very avid about these issues. I just think it's amazing that more people don't show up for these things.
I'm Daria Brown. I'm a nurse. I was interested because I heard Mr. Johnston being interviewed by Fisher on the radio yesterday afternoon, and I was just a little ticked over what I was hearing. So I thought I would come here and
And you live in Rock Island, right?
I live out here in Rock Island. I live just down the street.
Houston.
Yep.
So not just outside. Got it.
Hi, my name is Meg Lovejoy, and I'm on the sociology faculty here. And this is something I teach about. It's not my area of specialization, but I teach parts of it in different classes. And I'd love to just learn more about how to teach it better. But the main reason is really just being a concerned citizen and wanting to find ways of getting more involved in the issues, because I think they're so exciting.
Well, I feel like out of the three of us here, to kind of lead the discussion, I'm probably the least experienced and knowledgeable about politics and governments and the role of and how it relates to poverty and wealth inequality. But these two guys are giving me you're going to lead it, so I guess I'm going to kind of lead the discussion. So one of the major topics that I was kind of told to bring up and discuss, more informational, I think, because at least my experience as an alderman is the majority of the public don't know or are familiar with programs that a local government or the state government has to work on these things. So I just was going to kind of throw some of those out and describe what I know we're doing in the city already to address this issue, because I think that's a good groundwork to say, well, this is what we're doing, but obviously it's still a problem. So what can we do to expand upon what we're doing currently, or maybe what we're doing, how it's not working, or what the positives are from that. And then I'm sure Mayor Luba can have some comments on what they're doing across the river. I'm sure they're probably pretty similar, but I'm sure there's differences as well. So I'll just kind of go over some of those things. I know one of the major things that we do to funnel money, which I'm sure he can speak to as well, is continuing to deplete and get smaller, are federal dollars from CDBG. That funds a lot of our staff, but we also allocate some of that money every year that go to help things in terms of, like, if you need a new water heater, programs for major costs in a home that someone that's living in poverty or is low income that can't afford. Their furnace goes out, and it's obviously a huge cost. A lot of these people have no savings account, they have no ability to do it. So we have dollars every year that go to that, but it's small. I mean, it's a small amount of money. We just went over that this year, and you're talking, maybe a dozen households that you could help get a new furnace, if that, So it's a small amount of money, it's not enough, and it continues to get smaller. The federal government has cut that dollar pretty much every year. I'm sure you can speak to that more than me. But that's one area that we do help, but again, it doesn't cover it all. We also we allocate $50,000 every year from our gaming funds to community programs. They have to come in and apply for those dollars. And then we have a board of citizens, which I do like that aspect, that anybody like you can sit on this citizens advisory committee, and they listen to the groups and how these dollars will turn around back into the community. So I do think that's important. I know we've had aldermen want us to give less, and then there's been aldermen that have said I think we should give more. So I think that's an area that is important and is a way that our city is helping give back and improve programs that are working for people. And of course, my iPad shut off on me. And then a couple other ways that I think, one that's really important when we talk about just communication and knowing where to go and who to talk to and who can help you. Obviously, the local government is where it ends up being the city clerk's office is the catch-all, be-all for calls. I mean, people call there for everything you could possibly think of. So referral and communication in the community of where's the right place to go to get help is really important. And I know we do a lot of that at the local government. And then, I think a huge part of what we're talking about is just reinvigorating the communities that are in poverty, and the low-income communities, and making them have a sense of pride in where they're living and what they're doing. And a lot of that can come from help from the local government, in my opinion, in terms of removing blight in communities where that ultimately result in unsafe neighborhoods that perpetuate the cycle that we're talking about. So I know that's something that local governments can definitely help do, and we do some of that, but I think we could definitely do more of that in Rock Island. And then we obviously, we have the King Center in Rock Island too, a community center that the city supports, and they have a myriad of programs, which I'd be happy to discuss, but they're directly aimed at education for the youth, and they also have expanded on elderly programs as well, but definitely targeted at people that don't necessarily have the resources to really be successful and get good jobs and good education. So, and that's something that's city funded mostly. They get a lot of grants as well, but we've continued to support that in Rock Island. And something that people might not think about that I put on my list as a way that local governments can help and be involved is community gardens. I know Josh has done some himself, but obviously the cost of food, which is such a basic need and isn't always being met, especially healthy food, is huge in the poverty community, people living in low incomes and in poverty. And a city's ability to be able to offer that and offer properties that are available and to be supportive of those programs, I think is crucial, because I know some cities aren't, and it can become an issue if it's not handled. And I think Rock Island has been definitely very supportive of that. I think Josh can speak to that. And it's helped a lot of our communities that don't necessarily have access to fresh fruit or vegetables be able to get them. So I think those have been some important highlights of what we've done. But obviously in Rock Island, we are still having a lot of issues with it. You know, I think it's over 60% of our students in our school district are on free or reduced lunch, are living in our low income. So obviously with that figure, it's a problem, and that's a rough number, but I know it's over 60%. So we're doing a lot, it seems like, you know, when I list all these things, but obviously.
Did you say in Rock Island or?
Yeah, yeah. So we're doing a lot, it seems like when I list it all out on paper, but obviously it's not getting us anywhere really. I mean, I'm sure there are obviously individual success stories, but on the big picture scale, it's not really ticking forward in an effective way.
You're talking about the food program, or not the food program, like the garden?
Just all of the things I've listed. That many of these things I'm talking about, I mean, CDBG has been around for decades. You know, obviously most of the things I've listed have been around for years, and they're helping on an individual basis. Of course, I wouldn't say any of these programs aren't worthwhile, but obviously they're not really doing enough or being effective enough to tip the scale.
You did a great job. That's exactly, she's got it down. Congratulations. But it's a Band-Aid approach. I mean, we're just putting Band-Aids on problems, and I see it every day. And let me explain briefly, the Community Development Block Grant goes back to, it's actually Reagan promoted and Democrats voted for it. I'll be a part of just how it came about. Because it was a way to really get the federal government out, quite frankly. And the argument was, all the cities and the states can do it better. We'll just give them money, and they'll solve all the problems. Well, that sounds good, because we can do it with local control, local initiative. We know all that. You know. But it gets cut every year. We were getting $2.2 million, and it wasn't enough to start with. Now we're down to $1.2 million for all this stuff. And out of that, we have to fund the part of the administration to oversee all this stuff. Otherwise, we have to go to property taxes. And we're capped. Cities cannot raise any more money. And if there's just a cap, can't raise it anymore. We can't borrow it, you know, and we can't print it, so we don't have it. So that's the nature of, you know, the problem. And so it really has to come out of Washington. Or if I were to, just to fix the streets in Dallas, saying $279 million to fix the streets, the curbs, and the gutters. Just got that report. to fix them the way they should be. That's not counting the sewers and the sidewalks and the alleys. Our budget's 196 million total for police, fire, public works, libraries, etc. They're somewhere. So they're not enough money. Otherwise, well, we could tax, but we'd be driving the same people out of their homes that we're trying to keep in their homes. So a lot of retirees just simply, Social Security, they don't have enough coming in now. So that's not doable. It cannot be addressed at the local level through our tax structure. That's why I push the idea that we need to go where the money is. The federal government prints money, so we can't do that for everybody. I don't know. Some economists say it's based upon education and wealth of the nation and whatever. I tend to be a little more conservative, but so you got to raise it. The only place to get it is the federal government. A couple other things. To address poverty, it really hurts me to drive by, and I'll just say this, I go down 4th Street, you know, where King's Harvest is, or you go by all these shelter facilities, and always these poor guys, mostly there, you know, 20% are veterans, a lot of them have got mental problems, 80% of the people, Scott County Jail Court, the sheriff tells me have mental problems. I mean, they're just hanging around. And I'm thinking, my gosh, people stand around, waiting around, they run them out at 1, they have to leave at 8, 9 o'clock, can't come back until 5 or dinner time, and I can understand why, because they can't staff these places. But I've seen all these healthy men, maybe a little problem here or there, stand around doing nothing. Think about that. They ought to be at work. They ought to be work. I could put thousands of people to work, just as my people do the same in your city. We got jobs all over the
How
place.
capable are these, same men with these mental problems?
Some, you're right.
Because not all of them are really employable.
There's some, it's different strokes for different folks. They do it in a lot of other areas of the world, but they're not all going to be, you know, computer operators. But I get out on the shelters down last night, brought all the food for my little kids. Oh, these guys stand around friendly. They can do something. Everybody can do something. You know, you got to find out. That's another job for someone to find out what they can do and do it. But people need to have value and feel that their dignity's there and so on. Plus, you can't just, I don't believe in giving people something for nothing. Unless you're totally disabled, can't move, can't. You can do something. Handicap development proved that. The centers, you know, they guys are just really challenged. They do their little things. They're happy. They got their little apartment. We need to do that on a massive scale.
We used to have Skills Inc. and Moline, and I think they went under when the economy tanked.
Yeah, but anyway, that's
They were there for
one
years.
thing put people to work. Davenport tried, and got voted down 2-1. The Davenport Promise program, which was an effort like went up in Michigan, Kalamazoo. We've got to break the cycle of poverty, and one way to do it is through education. Every kid ought to have a right and a dream and a chance to go to college or get a higher education. What happens now, these studies are showing, and I don't want to get into all of it, but they do okay. We got these early childhood development programs, not enough. Kindergarten, preschool, all that. Daycares could be improved so kids can learn. But when they get to about the 4th grade, studies show they're starting to figure it out. They're saying, I can't ever go to college. I'm not going to have the money. I'm not going to live like the rest of the people. They just give up. As it further goes along, Davenport, 10.42% dropout rate, highest in the state.
What is it?
10.2. It's now down to 4.85 through some programs that the city got involved. We never used to be involved. Legally, we don't. The schools are separate bureaucracy. But that would have been a great program to guarantee every kid in Rock Island, Davenport, right to go to college. Why not? The other thing, I just lost my train of thought in addition to the Davenport program. Sisters of Humility. I've watched all these programs over the years. I was chairman of the Senate Human Resource Committee in Des Moines. And I tell you one that works. And what we've got to do is break that cycle of babies having babies.
Yeah.
29-year-old grandmothers. I'm not condemning them on race at all. It's just ignorance. It's just the way it is. And I had this young one, she was a minister, her name was Sanders. Anyway, Elizabeth Sanders. She was trying, she's a black minister, couldn't break into the church bureaucracy because most black churches are male dominated. Anyway, I was so impressed. One day she invited me down to Lake Claire Park. It was about 3 summers ago. And she had, and her friend or so, about 150 people there, of which about, I'd say 50 were young women, age 13 to probably 18. and the rest were little children, okay? All unwed mothers, every one of them. And there was this one 13-year-old girl, I remember they were playing games, and one of the games was musical chairs, okay? And this 13-year-old girl has a little baby strapped to her shoulder, whatever, probably a 6-month-old, 5-month, and they're doing musical chairs. And I got to thinking, wait a minute, that's not for the baby's benefit, that's for this little girl, the 13-year-old. That's the life. And so the Sisters of Humility, God bless them, they put their retirement and all that on the line, and they moved into the inner city of Davenport, and they started several programs. They took over the housing for the homeless, but they started a program to address the young women who have babies, out of unwed mothers, and they work with them, and I don't explain all, you can look into it yourself, but they're very strict. First of all, they find an apartment. They got 47 apartments throughout Davenport that they were able to get and fund. These young women then have to go to school, have to meet the certain standards, requirements. You can't just bring in the boys and have more babies. It's working. After about 12, 14 years, now they're seeing these young women who didn't have a chance before, now complete college, become nurses, become professionals. The cycle's broken. But they had a need. They told me they get 350 applications a year. They got 47 spots.
Yeah.
So I see that Davenport is helping, but it's getting worse. It's just snowball.
Well, it's going to keep getting worse as we keep having an increasing number of the populace having children when they're not married.
Yeah.
And we've
That's
got,
what we do.
so what are the policies to encourage marriage and make it seem like it's a worthwhile thing, and there's some real benefits to themselves and their children?
I don't
Are
think
we
there's
doing? Are we doing anything like that?
But marriage doesn't make you well off. It's not marriage, it's lack of economic opportunity that's the problem.
Well, it seems like when the people are married, they seem to have they've got each other, and they economically do seem to do better. I mean, I've seen the statistics on that, and they do better when they're married.
Oh, they
And if
better.
you start having kids and you're not married,
You're
and
poverty
you don't,
guaranteed.
and then these children have so many problems, the same social issues when you go
But if you
to
marry somebody who is also poor, it's not actually going to help. It might help slightly to have the economy, scale of economy.
But let's say,
But that's not the root of the problem.
you get a
so-
13 or 14-year-old girl and a 15, 18-year-old guy. Maybe the girl's living at home and the husband's boyfriend's coming over and having sex with her. I mean, what are you going to do?
That's what I'm saying,
So
is you're
marry-
gonna have
right.
more people like that who come out of homes where there is not their mommy and their daddy.
Right.
Because we're hardwired to have both a mommy and a daddy. And a lot of these kids don't have this, and they're making these kind of
But
choices.
this is what we
But
got.
economically, you're
That's what you
looking,
got.
so you gotta start somewhere, because we didn't start off here. We
So-
got,
We could really easily
We got here.
digress, I think, forever on this issue,
Right.
but, one of the things that I think maybe, at least I see that hasn't been a focus, and, a little bit of my background, I studied public policy at the university, at DePaul University, and so focused on a lot of these issues, is a big focus is on, well, there's not enough good male role models in the low-income communities, and they're discussing intergenerational poverty in another group discussion. As a young woman that sees other young women getting into that circumstance, I think that part of the issue is there isn't enough good role models, female role models in these communities. We focus so much about the high incarceration rates of males in a lot of the low-income communities, and of course that's a problem. But I think that the women in these communities, these 13-year-old girls, they need to know that they can go on to become teachers and nurses, and they don't need to necessarily follow the lead of the reality of
and
what
they're
their
more
mothers
likely
are
to
doing.
do that if they have their dad.
I personally, my personal feelings on marriage or whatever are separate from what I think the real issue is. That I think it's about self-esteem and respect and for yourself, and knowing that you can further
And that
on.
is
And
higher
I think
for
that-
the kids that come out of a married family.
I agree with
Well,
you.
There's no
Yeah,
we're not arguing
that's
that,
not
but
what we-
the reality of where
That's
we
not what
are.
we
Yeah.
We did something to
The
get here.
reality of
'cause
where
it
we are and
hasn't-
how we move forward is
This
what
did
we're
not
talking
used to
about.
be our reality. We got here, and we need to look at how we got here so that we can undo and move back.
Well, I think.
And it's better than
As if we used to.
education. Part of that-
And what are those?
When you have a parent that's working
right?
2 or 3
But
jobs,
articulate.
how can that person
When
be
we
a
grew up in the
parent?
50s, everybody had an opportunity they had parents, 2 parents, for the most part. They had jobs.
They
They were
had-
the mother didn't
But
have
they
to
had
work.
2 parents
We're not
during
gonna go
the
back to the
Depression.
days of.
They had 2 parents during the
Right, and they had a
Depression.
massive work program.
I'm sorry, that's not true. We had a world war. We had a lot of families where you didn't have 2 parents.
Yeah.
But society took care, you know,
I think this is
widows
kind
and
of a polarizing discussion that gets us
Yeah.
off track,
Right.
so, I mean.
What do we do with what we got today? Here's the reality out there. 1 out of 4 kids in Davenport's in poverty. And we got about half the kids drop out of school. You know, to me, it's a lot about money. If we had unlimited resources, we could figure this stuff out. Most problems can be solved. They say, don't throw money in it. No, we're not throwing money. We're pulling it back, unfortunately. It takes money. Whether it be cancer research, science, all getting to the moon, all took money, right? It just takes money. If we took Social Security away, we'd have a lot more poverty.
Well,
Or
of
Medicaid
course.
and Medicare. So it's a government thing. You know, let me read quick, just a second. Some of the stuff Roosevelt did. This is what we need to get back to an activist government. He said, you know, just start real quick. Whole list of things real fast here. Let me just okay. First of all, we saved the world by the Marshall Plan after the war. We rebuilt half the world. And then NATO, CEDO, Social Security was instituted. 8-hour work week was not happening under Roosevelt. 40-hour work week, the Wagner Act, which gave labor right to organize, Davis-Bacon Prevailing Wage Act, workman's compensation, unemployment's compensation, WPA, Work Progress Administration, Civilian Conservation Corps, the minimum wage was done back years ago, the GI Bill, TVA, we built the whole west, east, south, rural electrification, took care of the farmers, farm price supports, made it possible for farmers to say crop insurance, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the Security Exchange Commission, FHA, VA, guaranteed student loans, Pell Grants, Job Corps, AmeriCorps, school lunch program, Head Start, federal aid to local schools, Title IX, Medicaid, Medicare, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, the Lilly Ledbetter Faith Hair. In other words, it took a lot to make it happen. Like he showed at the beginning, the preamble, we were implementing some of that. It says to form a more perfect union. You know, we haven't done that yet.
Some of these,
So I think to
Some of
piggyback,
these
hold on, sorry, 1 second. I think to piggyback and Rory speak off of what he's saying, I think what we want to try to do here in this table discussion is talk about policies like those that we can actually try to address or enact now or expand upon what we have in place, or obviously many of those programs we still have, but maybe haven't evolved in the right manner to be effective today. So I think that's what we should try to focus on in this discussion, is maybe some of those things are in your experience with your job or what you're doing in the community on areas that you think that we could change those policies, or maybe potentially create new policies in governance, either at the local level. Obviously, I know all 3 of us deal with state legislators and federal legislators as well, and that's where the discussion needs to go, is what do we need to be telling our legislators that we think needs to happen from the ground level, because we're the ones really there
You're in the
doing it,
trenches.
living it every day. So that's what you guys are here for, is maybe to say, well, this is something I see working at the newspaper, that because of this, you know, workman's comp is something that I know is also killing cities now, you know, because of how it's how the law is set up in Illinois financially. So there's a lot of issues that we can talk about at a policy level that I think may be a better way to take the discussion, if that makes sense.
Better to light one candle than curse the darkness.
Yeah.
So
Well,
light candles.
I guess what bugs me is there's people particularly conservatives that say government does not work. They want everybody to think that government should be small and that it does not work. And that is a big message that everybody hears, and therefore it is killing a lot of these projects that need to happen for people. People don't understand that government can work for them, and it is a good thing. But they give the message it is not. And I'll tell you another thing. Government is working. It is working. These people have got it figured out how it works for them.
That's what you said today. It's a fact.
They got to figure out how it works for them and how it benefits them, the wealthy and the corporations. And the people on the bottom rungs get nothing. Or that's what they'd like for them to get. They get very little.
Don't leave out the politicians, because they're the ones who make it possible.
It's us too. It's us. It's amazing to me that more people are at these meetings.
Yeah.
It appears to me as if you two representatives or representatives of local government are articulating that you're overwhelmed to a lot of by problems.
It's getting more serious.
And the problems are of the nature, having been involved other places with charitable organizations. They're overwhelmed.
Yes.
By
Oh,
the
yeah.
need outstrips
Resources.
Absolutely.
Rational solutions.
Well,
So the real thing we're talking about is how do you craft rational solutions? Need will always outstrip rational solutions. But how do you
But that
move
doesn't-
forward?
that doesn't necessarily have to be true either. There's enough,
I think
there's
that's
enough
a
for
human. I
people.
think that's a human condition.
I got a starting point for you, and I think this is one thing that has to be done. We have to have campaign finance reform
Yes,
on the state level,
Yes.
national level, and
Yes.
probably financing of campaigns.
Yes.
As long as you have politicians beholden to the big spenders, you know, I don't know how a politician can be objective about looking at any.
Yeah, we got the best congressman.
Well,
we can buy.
but I want before I get left here, I want to back up and talk about the rational solutions to these problems. That if we all got in the room, we wouldn't devise what we have now. Rational solutions to the problems we've talked about are implemented at the local level, but they have to be rational at a higher level, a national level. And that's something I think at one time we may have done better. We talked about block grants, shoveling money and control to the state, to local governments, and that's a good thing in certain circumstances. But you know, Head Start was devised to break some of the cycle we've talked about here. It's low-income communities are basically have a cycle of continuing their current behavior. Head Start was put money and resources with a child and get them out of that behavior and teach them different behavior at a very young age. That is a rational solution. It's also one of those that is beyond the funding of local communities that are necessitated, are funded by fixed resources, don't have an income tax, or you know, I spent most of my adult life in an inner city where the resources had run away to the suburbs. So the inner city was struggling, whereas the suburbs are doing fine. That funding source, those rational, you know, conservative or liberal, if you sit down and talk about rational solutions, that's a rational solution.
I have a question about that, though. You maybe have some additional information that I don't have, but I had heard that Head Start helped the kids up to a certain grade level, and then it didn't seem to make any difference as far as outcome.
I don't know that.
And I've heard.
And I know that there's
number-
been studied to death.
I've heard it from a number of different times over the years, which has made me wonder why. Why we aren't putting our resources more into the family itself rather than, you know, trying to deal with the kid, because they still go home to live with their parents.
But let's figure out a rational way to put resources in the family.
So
Exactly. I'm
Okay.
all for that.
Well, there we go.
I think one of the things that resonated most with me with the speaker that I feel happens a lot with me as a leader of a local government, being someone that is quote unquote the future, since I'm obviously a very young leader, is that the speaker said something about to the effect that many of our elected officials today, they're making decisions on what's good for right now, or also Mayor Guba mentioned a Band-Aid for the problem. And yes, we do have a huge problem right now, and obviously there needs to be resources addressed to that, but if we don't start attacking prevention and how to get to the people that we almost know by history are projected to end up in the same circumstances. So I think maybe that's a good starting point in terms of rational policy, because to me, that seems to be the most rational way to start to address our issues for the future. Because look, we're already in a mess right now, obviously. And the idea is that we want it to start to get better in the next generation. You know, it's gonna take a generation really. If we enact some policies now, you're not gonna see that magically change the people that are already in that situation. But the idea is that people that are kids now won't end up in the same circumstances that maybe their parents are in. So I think maybe from a rational standpoint, I think you hit the nail on the head using the word rational. What are maybe some things we can do, like a Head Start program, even if it's, I don't think his point was that Head Start was the end all be all, but just an example of trying to do something rationally instead of just argue back and forth about what's good or what's
It's
not
our
good.
whole economic model is goofy. Our whole
Yeah.
economic model
So-
is not right.
So let's try to talk about, I mean, I know for me, it gets really overwhelming if we talk in broad strokes like that. So let's maybe focus on one specific factor that we brought up today and say, okay, how can we address that? So maybe we talk about education. That's been brought up a lot, and to me, I think that's definitely something that's a preventative and future building type of thing. So I know in Rock Island, our schools are not doing well. I discussed obviously 60% or more are low income. So what's something we can do as a community on a policy level, or also get our state legislators or our federal legislators to do to solve what's happening in education, not just at the elementary school level, but I'm sure Josh and I will both would be willing to admit we're in debt from going to college. So how, maybe let's take just that subject and talk about that, and maybe some of the things you guys think we could do.
You're never going to solve anything until you solve it at the federal level. That is where the corruption is.
I tend to agree with that.
That is the corruption
lack
is.
of funding.
I'm not saying that I disagree with you on that. I just know that I don't think this room is going to necessarily solve
Well,
that
that's
problem
right, but it's got to be a start somewhere.
Absolutely.
What I'd like to recommend, also put how you're going to pay for it. You know, talk about it at the local level. We agree, Head Start works, don't work.
Well, sure.
Where's money coming from?
Absolutely.
My first question.
Absolutely.
Well,
Yeah, and it's got to come from the federal government.
Absolutely.
And the federal government needs to learn how to tax rich people and corporations to pay their fair share.
Absolutely. But
That is where the problem is, and that is what has got to be addressed by this country. And until people go en masse to Washington DC and demand change, nothing will happen out here.
I
And then
don't
they go,
disagree with you.
because they could care less, you know.
But
They're
if
elected.
what my point was, if we could walk away from this room with one
And I don't mean to
topic.
yell at you.
No, it's fine. I just know from my experience that if we could walk away from this room with one issue to attack
Well,
Washington
let me put you
it
on
could
the
make a
spot.
difference.
What's that one issue? What the one thing that you want to do?
Well, that's what I
she brought up education and how to.
What about education?
What do you mean?
What about education?
Well, how
What do you
about-
do with it?
How can we help?
Pardon?
How can we help, say, a better graduation percentage? Is there a way maybe to provide mentors
Well, I'll give
for
you-
educational
Well,
or
sure.
elementary school students? A mentor costs nothing if they volunteer. They come and help read to the kids. They might help, like Big Brothers do with homework. Things like this might raise the level at a very minimal, if any, cost. That's a suggestion.
Okay.
I think, I think one good way to start is to take property taxes out of funding schools that make it, I mean, so Bettendorf and Pleasant Valley, for example, have a huge property tax base. And gee, they're considered to be the best schools in the Quad Cities. Rock Island has a much less property tax base, so their schools have a lot less money to spend. So, making finding a way through taxation to fund schools through a progressive tax and not an income tax would be a good way to start.
How about if
Can
all
I-
those
can I-
taxes go into a county fund and the county then dispenses these funds on a more equal level rather than saying Pleasant Valley because they have the ability to fund their schools at a higher level and the other communities suffer.
That's brilliant. Property taxes are usually broken down by components. One of the components is the educational system.
Sure.
One of the components is road and maintenance and all the other components.
Mhm.
If you made the educational system regional rather
Just
than
in a county or something, yeah.
city-based, I mean, you don't have to look any farther than Detroit to see their issues. If you made if you expanded, and here's something you could do. I mean, you could do it by state government. If you could expand the educational component of that property taxes to define it as a regional, it has to be set on a regional basis so that the same amount that Davenport gets or Bettendorf or Pleasant Valley gets are uniform. Maybe that's not right because, I mean, Davenport may have more kids or less kids.
Well, on a per pupil
But,
basis.
that may be one way of addressing it.
And then there's also an element, sorry, I forgot your name.
Cliff Day. I think what
okay.
you're getting down to is that, in theory, for the state of Iowa, in theory, and I'm not an educational expert, but in theory, you should be able to figure out how much it costs, reasonably costs per pupil to educate a pupil. How many $1,000s that is that you have to allocate. And that X number of thousands of dollars that you have to spend every year takes care of everything, the books, the teachers, the classroom, the building that you're housed in, heating the building, cooling the building, all of that. How much does that cost per pupil? And then perhaps raise that money on the income tax rather than, on a district-wide basis by property
That's exactly what
tax.
I'm saying.
And understand that state and federal grants to,
Are you
So
talking
let
the
me-
state income
let me jump
tax
in.
or?
Really quickly.
What we're talking about now is that your schools are based, primarily on, you get some federal aid. You have a lot of federal control right now, but not a lot of federal aid, which, how did we get into that bucket? And then on whatever state you're in, usually the property tax pays for the schooling. So some of the property districts are better, financially off than other districts. So if you go into a richer neighborhood, they're going to have richer schools. And that's what it comes down to. So in a democracy, a representative democracy, that doesn't make a lot of sense. You want somebody who's poor to basically get about the same education as somebody who's very well-to-do,
I understand.
so that they can all, meet their citizenship obligations. Am I making any sense?
No,
Well, I'd actually go farther,
so
is
in-
that-
So in Illinois, because I'm Illinoisan, in Illinois, education is funded through primarily, obviously through property tax, but then the state's portion of it is determined, and this is a general explanation of it, but in large part by test score outcomes. So what you have in Illinois, obviously, are typically, and this is a broad stroke explanation of it, but your suburban schools that are actually the wealthiest, not Chicago, your suburban schools who have the most funding in property taxes also get actually a pretty good portion of the state funding because their academic outcomes are better. So you have schools downstate, this area, our schools are not doing well and our property taxes are not very supportive. You have dual.
So really, excuse me, that's a reverse
Yes.
philosophy
So-
of what it should be. You should be
Right,
giving
right.
more
And so,
assets to the
in Illinois,
people that aren't
yes,
doing it.
Absolutely.
That's
So
right.
that's
That's
why-
the rational
That's why
solution.
he asked me something that I
And
would
this
like
is
to
not
see us
right.
do is obviously to take that away from test scores and educational attainment and have a system where you do
This is
essentially
what our whole
determine.
system is based on, is the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And that we're reaping results of it. My question is, does this poverty cost us more in the long run than if we
Of course.
sanely addressed it?
Of course.
$35,000 a pop.
That's right. That's right.
Every year.
Exactly, exactly.
Go to St. Ambrose.
So we're
Well, and the
insane.
lack of potential too. I mean,
Absolutely.
we're hurting ourselves by
Yes.
the lack of
not
potential
addressing it.
of.
Yes.
Think of the potential in the
Of course.
low-income communities that we're
Of
wasting.
course.
But you're
That
talking
way-
about the Illinois schools. Back to my basic question. You're bankrupt. Your state is
Yeah.
Yes,
doesn't pay a
yes.
dime for, doesn't pay its bills now. So where are you gonna get the extra money?
That's a great question. Well, I wouldn't say extra money, but what
Or
we're
just
already
the money,
spending
but
per
shifting
year
it
should
around.
be.
Right,
Well,
but the extra money.
just-
Until
The wealthy districts are getting most of the
And it's
benefit,
being,
and
it's
any
being
rational
discussed at our
person.
state legislature. We've got a bipartisan, 2 senators, 1 Republican, 1 Democrat that have introduced a bill, and it's been discussed numerous times now to do just that. But obviously, it's going to be difficult to get through.
They're not
because
even
of-
gonna raise or keep the existing income tax that they tap the few at the top a little more, I guess, everybody to be somewhat
Sure.
closer to Iowa. They're gonna apparently leave that alone. Anyway, so my point is back to the
Yeah.
money. You gotta tell me where you get the money, because everything I say, give me
Well,
the money.
until-
I'll show me your money.
until-
Well, that's how to use them.
Until we
That's how
become
you
a
use it, how to get
society that cares about people again, we're not going to change. People are not important today. That's the message I get from a lot of these people who, people are not important, cut these programs, cut education, cut food stamps, cut all the stuff. People are not important anymore. And until we decide they are, that's the way we're going to be treated.
I do taxes for a living. I didn't realize that, that little twist in the law.
Well, that's one factor.
But that's
of
a,
the state
that's
funding. It's not
to
all
me,
the things, but-
to give,
Yeah.
to favor the,
Accomplished or
the most,
higher test scores.
Yes,
well, and the higher test scores go to the more affluent communities because
of
of
course.
all the problems we've talked about now. That is not a rational solution. And the question is, how do you get the word out to people that that is not a rational solution? Again, if you, my kids are okay. It's people who are struggling kids that need help. And if we don't help them, we all lose.
Well, and a lot of these kids, they see no way out. There's no steps upward anymore. There's not an attitude of, I can climb this ladder. So what does that do to the
So they
psyche?
drop out of school. There's 4th grade, as all the studies show, starting about 4th
Yeah.
grade, they start giving up because they can see now they're smart.
Yeah.
My dad, I don't even have a dad. My mother, she's not there, so she gets by. Hey, when you talk
Right.
about all these nice
They-
things, middle class, white American, that doesn't affect me. And the best kid, I saw it on television. Kid said it so well. Black African American, he was on something, and he obviously got in a lot of trouble. And somebody asked him, well, what about it? He says, I got to do what I got to do. He was mad. I got to do what I got to do. That's just I shoot you, get your money, I'll kill you. I got to do what I got to do. Think about that. And he's right.
Survival.
To survive. Now that's what we're created out there.
And that's why we've got such a violent society too in the United
Yeah,
States.
that's what he's saying. I get my money. I'll sell drugs.
That's right.
I'll shoot you if I have to.
Does not make
The hell of a lot of
sense.
people.
Doesn't that make
It's worse.
sense?
It's not just black.
And
It's
nobody
poor.
says that we should give people a
Something.
chance. Yes, people want to work. They want to better themselves. They want to feel self-esteem in doing a good job.
Does anybody, sorry, I just want to give anybody down here a
Can I just make
chance.
a
There's always a few
small,
bad
small
apples
scale
coming.
comment?
Yeah, there's a few bad
Something I've
apples.
noticed, like volunteering in the Quad Cities, is that Well, I mean, there's a very high population of refugees and Hispanics, and I think that one big barrier to education is not having good English skills whenever they start school and not having any support for that. So one thing that we could do that I think would be relatively inexpensive would be increasing the number of like ESL providers at schools and having a better support system for these young kids who don't speak English at home to have an opportunity to learn English before being just placed in a kindergarten class, because ultimately what ends up happening is they end up in special education classes which aren't serving their needs because their problems aren't intellectual disabilities, their problems are language deficiencies.
And they're still required to take all of the same state testing as
Right.
obviously.
I think that's a good suggestion, and if you brought it to your school board, they'd say, oh, that's great, show me where the money is. We gotta hire
How to
an
hire.
average teacher, 28,
We do
25,
actually do a
whatever.
lot
We don't have
with
money.
these,
They're just, Davenport's cutting
Yeah.
$9 million next 3 years, rock and roll.
Good money.
It's it's a rational answer, but it's all there.
Is there cutting $9 million due to federal and state funding?
And mostly state funding, the way Iowa does it. It's a complicated formula, but the bottom line is they put a cap on how much you can grow your budget, even though your problems may be this much, you're only given this much, and then you gotta cut your budget. So they're gonna, plus we losing 200 and some kids to Bettendorf and Pleasant Valley. For every child we lose $5,900 in state aid. I mean, so the kid goes out there because maybe it's race, maybe it's whatever, maybe they want to play football at Bettendorf, and they're good at that. And that's their way out. $5,000, that's $1 million some dollars a year. There's a lot more to it.
And state aid is per head?
It's a combination. Yeah, every one of my, I call them Iowa, we get about $5,900 per kid from the state, and then the rest comes out of property taxes and a few other things. They're convoluted, complicated formula. Iowa's got probably one of the better ones. I don't understand Illinois, but it always boils down to money. In Iowa, they just cut property taxes on business, commercial, industrial. And it'll be cut 50% over 5 years. That's 10% cut a year. Now they are giving us for a while, the city, the money to make up the difference. But they also eliminate tax over 5 years on commercial, on apartment complexes, all apartments.
Yeah.
Now, are they
Don't
going
get me
to,
started on that.
you know, are they going to reduce their rents, these big out-of-state land? No. So, but they're shrinking the money in the pot. So Davenport, where do we go? Can't raise property taxes. We'll just cut police, fire. Schools will cut teachers, and it continues.
All the apartment
Close
complexes
schools.
are going into co-ops to get out,
And then,
which is hammering a square peg into a round hole.
but, and another thing about this whole inequality thing, it's not just the poor, it's the middle class.
Oh, absolutely.
It's the middle class is going away, folks.
All this
Because
country-
more people are falling into poverty, more people are losing their jobs or having to take lower paying jobs. So it's, our good life is going away. And I said, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I said, these people want us to be in Mexico. They want us to live like the Mexicans do.
Since you brought it up.
That's where we're headed.
Another thing we're going to have to deal with as a society over, not next year, not 5 years from now, but over the coming decades, you're going to have to deal with more and more automation. It's going to take
Yes.
more and more jobs.
Yes.
So we're going to have, but that automation, generates wealth, tremendous amount of wealth. If you're talking to customer service, and customer service is an artificial intelligence, I think maybe you've all had that experience where you're talking to a computer, the computer's interrogating you and asking you questions, and then it can understand what you're saying. That's artificial intelligence type program. You're going to see more and more and more of that, and it's going to creep into more and more of the college level jobs.
Yeah.
So we have to figure out how we're going to share the wealth of the society when a lot of that wealth no longer depends on a human doing the job, but on an artificial intelligence or a robot doing
It's
the job.
already taken over a lot of jobs.
You're not going to see it maybe in the next 5 years, but over the coming decades, you're going to have to deal with it. The other thing you're going to have to deal with is that I keep hearing about, sending students to college and things like that, but we have other things that we need people to do. And We need more, I don't want to call it vocational education because I think that's a hackneyed term, but we need to prepare more people for all kinds of skilled trades
Yes.
other than sitting at a desk. You know,
Well, this is what a lot of the European
Yes,
countries
I was
do,
just gonna say.
where
We need to look at
you
other
take a
role
test at a certain level, and either you're college material or you're
No,
a welder
no,
material.
you're not understanding me.
Okay, well, still, that certainly is a road to go also.
But the assumption we make in America is that if you're doing a vocational job, that somehow you didn't cut the mustard. So we'll take a test and we'll sort you out and you're going to do. I do not want somebody of marginal intelligence working on that airplane that I'm going to ride in. Let me put it to you that way. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Oh, sure.
Or working on my automobile when an automobile has more and more electronic components in it, where you have to be very highly trained. The Europeans have apprenticeships, where you have to make a decision whether or not you're going to go into that apprentice program, but they value their trades. We here in the United States, not so much. You want to sit in the big office with the window and and shuffle papers and all that, and that's fine. We need administrative people. I was an administrative person, but we need all kinds of people, and I keep hearing the idea of go to college.
Educated people, I don't care whether you're working
It's
on
less
the
about
assembly
testing
line or
somebody
bitch, you still need
of
to
whether
have
they're-
Education and
benefit of the whole.
How
community.
smart are
ability
there?
to
It's
solve
more of
problems and ask questions.
what are you
of course.
skilled at?
And I just need
you
to
know,
understand
everybody
that.
is different, where their brain works better in engineering or their brain works better in this
Yeah,
way.
what works.
But we
in-
don't test for that in high schools. We
And
don't
there-
do a lot of
There are a lot of
aptitude
people maybe
testing.
working at the desk or working on the phone
should be.
that maybe would have
Yes.
been happier.
Exactly.
But they still need to be educated. Our
Exactly.
constitutional form of government is based on an educated elected. That's
Maybe
what
a shovel.
you do. Anyway.
Now, I have, my big question is, how do we cut taxes on these corporations, give them a 10-year, $10 million tax rebate, whatever, when our population is increasing, and this is throughout the world, our population is increasing, we're cutting taxes, we're lessening our resources, and then we sit here and say, what happened? Or where are we going from here? I don't understand how we're allowing this as a general population for somebody like our current governor to say, well, we need to cut taxes. I mean, it looks good on his resume, but it sure as hell doesn't work for schools and roads and whatever. So that's my big question.
One question is just, how do you know the old analogy, what is about a frog? If you put a frog in a pan of water, turn the heat on, turn it on, he'll sit there and sit there and sit there until he's cooked.
Eventually.
Eventually. It didn't happen overnight. It took 40 years. And that's what the docile ones out there, they're getting screwed over and they're just sitting there and sitting there. Now they can't jump, but eventually you cook them. Essentially that analogy.
that's what
very
we've
well
done.
stated.
We've
That's
just
what we've
sat
done.
here.
And people are so concerned, like sex sells from sports. They're bombarded daily with the right-wing crap over
Yes.
that you hear all day long. We've had it since Roger Ailes. Roger Ailes, smartest guy, political operative in the country. He chairman of the Republican Party, conservative,
Absolutely.
went to the big boys. They bankrolled his Fox, bankrolled all this Clear Channel, and that's all you get. You don't get this in the normal papers. You don't get this on most stations. You don't get this. He should be speaking at national organizations that could give him $65,000 a speech, like Reagan and the boys do, a lot of others, like the National Association of Realtors, National Association of whatever it is. He's talking to us, and we don't.
But you know what, I think with all due respect, that goes back to his point today when he said, we're complaining about campaign finances and how much money is being spent, but that those political ads only tip the scale potentially 2% in an election. There isn't enough door knocking. There isn't enough people being participative in government. People have given up. I know, especially our generation, I have to beg my friends to be involved. They have no idea what I even do. They have no clue how much time and effort I spend being an alderman, that I literally have to beg people. I even go as simple, because you think, oh, social media, that's easy for people to get involved. Set up a Facebook page for for millennials in the Quad Cities can't get anybody to participate on it. How did we get this way?
So
Because
what are they
people aren't
doing?
participating.
Since I'm not a young person anymore, what are they doing? Are they just working?
It's so
too hard?
important.
No,
Or-
well, I think it's a lot of what's fun, and also a lot of us are facing trying to just get their heads above water, because most of the people I know are have more in debt than they do in equity. So they're focused on trying
Yeah, it was all
You're
a plan.
working
It was all
hard,
a
you're
plan.
working harder than we did.
Yeah.
For less.
It
My
was all a
generation.
plan that has worked out magnificently for these people. It was, believe me, all these, Cato Institute, et cetera, they have worked, they worked hard to change the American philosophy,
But I
to dumb down people.
The
Believe me.
message, though, for millennials is you're working harder than your parents.
Right, for less.
And why?
Absolutely.
Well, as
Yes.
someone who's,
Of course.
to kind of chime in here, for most of my peers, I feel like their experience with the government is experience when they see their payroll stuff. And they see Social Security, they see Medicare, they see the state income tax, the federal income tax. And that's their relationship with the government. They see a lot going out. And then what they see on TV, what they read in the newspapers, is a lot of squandering of funds. And that's what the media sensationalizes. They sensationalize the conflict and not the policy itself. And we are very busy. In school, we were taught to take on extracurricular activities and have a full schedule, and voting was something our parents did, and we had pretty good lives growing up for the most part. But in my regard, I think about these programs because I've directly been affected by it. The 1935 Social Security Act came into law. In 1992, my father died. I have 3 other siblings and my mom. His Social Security survivor benefits kept us out of abject poverty. So I know firsthand what these things do. But a lot of people don't have the opportunity to experience that. They don't understand when government can work for them, and a benevolent society can come in. And the people who are out there working at Wall Street, farmers in Iowa, everyone's chipping in so that my mom can stay home and raise us kids. She doesn't have to go out and work a 40-hour job to raise 4 kids, 3 of whom graduate from college. Okay? I have peers who grew up in similar situations, and it wasn't so much the case with 2 working parents making near poverty income combined. Those kids, their parents are working all the time, they're not in the house. Those kids, unfortunately, haven't had the opportunities that I've had in life. And there's the onus on the individual person, but the environment that you grow up in, I think, is significant. Now, I've been listening to a lot of, and I wanted to share just a couple of numbers here, just to kind of,
Before you do that, Josh,
Yeah.
we are scheduled to break around 20:15, and we convene in the auditorium at 12:30
Okay.
to do the roundtable discussion, or seats, or whatever they're going to have there. So I just wanted to let you guys know. Thank you.
I'll try to make this quick then. Just, I studied political science here. I graduated in 2010. And the thing that we learned with policy is that you have the current policy, and then you have policy alternatives. And one of those alternatives is always the status quo. You can keep it safe. But to have the rational, relevant, productive discussion, you kind of have to know what your options are out there. But you start with the budget. And Mayor Glub has been hitting on this consistently now, the money. And our federal budget is a reflection of our values. And I'll give you just 2 numbers to show you this. So we talked about CDGB. The federal budget for that is $4.7 billion. $4.7 billion. Education is $69.8 billion. Military spending is $495 billion. Our federal budget is $3.7 trillion.
And that doesn't count the war that we just
And that
have been
doesn't
fighting.
count-
That's
that
the
doesn't
issue,
count the
the
war.
war.
So-
Top of that.
I think, one of the talking points that Alderman Holmes trying to get us to walk away with here in terms of education is, and Mayor Glub was saying, our state's broke. And other states are in similar situations where the citizens are being affected by very poor governments. But we can't afford to lose that human capital. But when we only allocate out of our $3.7 trillion budget, $69.8 billion, that's nothing. And when you look at our military spending, and no one doubts that we should have a strong military. But let's not forget this is the country that beat Great Britain in the Revolutionary War, who had the strongest military in the world at that time, with farm shooters in the backwoods, and we won. We spent more than our 26 counterparts combined, and they are almost all of them are allies. And so we look at this allocation of funding for bombs and tanks and things like that, and we watch our schools crumble. And I guess the point I want to make is that the more that we can do as individuals to, and you can go to Wikipedia, I have a lot of this stuff from Wikipedia, just to go there and just read the federal budget, look at where the dollars are at, understand we have a starting pool. But then I want to talk about, we talk about 35 years. I've heard that and what happened 35 years ago was 1980. And that was the start of this right here, Reaganomics. And this is available for everybody to read. Now, this is something that had very concrete outcomes and objectives. The president wanted to do something very concrete at that time. What we were left was a federal debt that was at $998 million to $2.85 billion. The lowest tax rates we had in almost half a century for the top income earners. Deregulation happened, setting the stage for what was eventually going to happen with the Great Recession. And so these were policy choices that I think everybody should read and understand that these were choices that were made and written, and this was the antithesis to the New Deal. You print out the New Deal, I didn't bring it with me, but it's 57 pages long. This one's about 15. Not the actual bills, but just to show you, it only took 14 pages of information basically to undo all the things that Mayor Blue listed in the beginning.
I have a question. Reagan was only president for 8 years, and a long time ago. You mean that all of this stuff has stayed intact all these years?
Of course.
Virtually untouched.
When we've had all these,
The Democrats and
so
Republicans
many-
work for the same master.
we've had all these opportunities to make changes.
It was a national change that happened at that level.
How is it that he was able to make that change, and we've never been able to make any changes since?
This was an era where we started to see that the corporations kind of realizing that we can't leave these elections alone. There's too much money here. The Treasury is too big to leave alone. And this was the beginning of an era when you started to see this mass formation of present day 100,000 professional lobbyists working in D.C. 100,000, not a single one of them working for us. And that's their job, and they're all representing special interests.
And they're all writing checks to all our congressmen. Don't
Yeah.
forget that.
Everybody likes tax breaks.
Yeah.
In the Reagan tax breaks, I got at the time, I was just starting out, I got, I think, a 0.5% tax break on my taxes. I got more money and I was happy. But the tax rates went from 70% to 28%.
Yes.
So who benefited the most? I know.
The banking industry supplies 5 lobbyists for every congressperson.
That's a fact.
So we
That's
see
true of all the big ones.
we see this coming up nationally. I pulled 2 articles that I read when they came out, one in April and one just very recently. But this one, New York Times, I look at the New York Times as something as a national record for what's going on. The American middle class is no longer the world's richest. And it's what happens, so pre-tax, they look at, there's a metric called the Gini coefficient that basically talks about inequality. So pre-tax, United States is kind of in the middle of the pack. But after our tax system comes into play, we are #1 out of our OECD, our economic development cooperation partners around the world. We're #1 in creating structural inequality. But then to help damper that, we have our social welfare programs. But when we compare those to our counterparts abroad, we see that as in terms of GDP and the federal deficit, we spend the least amount in terms of, and very specifically to what we were talking about earlier with the family situation, children. I believe that when you look at the family unit and individuals, single or married, having kids, in some countries, European countries, it's illegal for the mother not to be home with the child for the first year. A lot of these countries mandate 30 days at least for everybody to have off, to take their time off. 90%, Sweden has one of the highest or lowest ratios of inequality, highest metrics of prosperity and overall happiness. 95% of the workforce is doing it. All of the women have the opportunity to stay home with the children, and so do the men. They actually have some months like that.
You mean
So-
like for the first couple of years?
for the first couple of
Yeah.
years. So,
Yeah.
and then there are literally cash programs that are very similar to like our earned income tax credit, where the government supplies that additional funding because they understand the biggest investment rate on return, dollar for dollar, is investing in kids. that is the future equity of the nation. Those are the future workers of the nation. So I guess I just wanted to share all
What's
this
their
information.
individual, excuse me, what's
Yeah.
their individual tax level, say in Sweden?
The countries with the highest or lowest levels of inequality, highest public services or social welfare programs, they have the highest tax rates on the wealthy by far. They take that.
Or even the common man? Their taxes are
Right,
around 50%.
but it is a very,
aren't they?
it is a very aggressive, progressive tax though. So it's
Yeah.
similar to like how we used to
Yeah.
have it with the 91%, not
But
quite that
all
high.
I'm saying is the proof is in the pudding, that it does take money. The
There are
mayor's
working
right, but
policies that
it
show.
does take money
Yeah.
to support these programs of education, of keeping mom home, of doing
They've only
these
got
things.
3 to
So-
7 million people.
So,
Chump
yeah,
change.
well, of course.
And a
But
lot of these
that's a
countries
factor.
have free college educations. You don't pay for college there.
But they
But you
also
are
do
paying
things
for it
like your
through
husband.
Well,
said,
yes,
they take
but I'm
taxes.
saying they don't have these big
Get to go.
these big.
I think one of the things that the work
Debts.
is trying to accomplish is, so what do we do about all this? I
Yeah.
think we all have a very
Well, yeah, we
similar
know the problem.
analysis.
It's
So,
not a deal.
so, I mean, just, my 2 cents, which is, just a broad stroke kind of idea, which is let's get to the root of the problem. Like, what is really the deepest level of the problem that we're struggling with here? And fix those, because the deeper you go, the smaller number of factors that you're dealing with, and that you can sort of pinpoint and organize around, whether it's social movements or policy change or whatever. So what are these root issues? Can we come up with just a couple of root issues, like campaign finance reform,
Campaign finance reform.
I think that.
taxation and changing the tax
That's,
system?
I think it's.
Federally
what-
funded
I think-
elections.
I think it's what you said, and I think it's what you said
Publicly funded
earlier.
elections.
I think what everybody said and what Josh was saying is that the people that we are, and obviously what Mayor Blue was saying, that our federal government, our Congress is not getting it done because whether Democrat or Republican, like you said, they're all getting major donations from
Not all, but
multi-million
most.
dollar corporations.
Some specifics he mentioned,
Yes.
these are the standard things, but, we had a low vote turnout last time. It's, the ice isn't off here, but it's way down, but you gotta pay people to go out, get people out to vote, pay them. He mentioned, run for public office, unionize. That's the way that we spread some of the wealth around, that's the purpose of unions. I throw in there, I think about, when these politicians, when Hillary comes, we got not to be consulted and be used as props. And I help coordinate Obama, staff comes in and they tell you who you can let in. I mean, they let everybody in, but, they don't want any questions, how it is.
Yeah.
They're up there.
Yeah, that's-
That we gotta say, maybe we ought to go to the next big mass rally and all not stand or protest out in front and say, no, we want you out here talking about the real issues.
Yeah.
Just throwing it out. Don't cave in so quick. That's,
Well,
don't.
and it's my understanding, like, this Joni Ernst in Iowa wouldn't even appear before newspapers to be asked questions.
Keepers told her to do that. She did the right thing.
Yeah, she wouldn't even,
But that's
And
the
she's
genius of
elected.
Wall Street advertising. I
Sure.
mean, that's the way it's gonna be in the future.
Well,
Why would you want, if you can
we
win
have
the thing
access
by
to-
having a pretty face and somebody's half smart and being a nice, friendly little
Yeah.
country girl from
Sure.
Iowa, you do it. You take the
that
same
rides a
dummy from
Harley
Illinois or
and has
whatever.
a gun and castrates pigs. Boy, don't we have high,
That's the way, that's smart advertising.
Okay,
So we have access to
Well-
quite a few members of Congress. And we're very fortunate in that we have this five-state community where we have Congressman Loebsack, Congresswoman Bustos, Senators Grassley, and soon-to-be Ernst, and Durbin, and Kirk. So that's 6 members of Congress there. And I think you want to talk about just one concrete action set. If they don't hear from us, and Kate has done an incredible job of articulating this, that if they don't hear from us, they don't know. And I think the simplest thing, because most of them have local offices, Davenport, downtown Rock Island, call up the local office and say, you don't think it's acceptable that such a small share of our federal budget is spent on education, that our states need help, but more importantly, our kids are worth investing. Dollar for dollar, the wisest investment we can make as a nation. That when we can afford $500 million on military spending, but we can only afford $70 million on education, as this nation, that's unacceptable. And that's a concrete step. And having those conversations, letter to the editor, let them know, get this up to this surface.
I got a question. Do you have any figures on what the government spends for entitlement programs? Entitlement programs?
Outside of Social Security and Medicare, I actually have the chairman of the. Well, actually, it's the single largest collective pool of spending for the federal budget. It's $1 trillion. Jeff Sessions is the ranking member of the Senate Committee on the Budget, and he's outlined here all these programs that are related to direct. But this was not a friendly list. This was prepared as a hit list. That the $1 trillion for these programs, which is significantly insufficient. When we look at our European counterparts and other developed nations, what they spend on similar programs, and he's saying that $1 trillion is far too much, that we have to cut it. What he's talking about is child and adult food care programs, summer food service program, food program nutrition assistance.
But this is what we are currently spending, just to get a.
Yeah, well, about $1 trillion annually. That does not include Social Security, Medicare. Those are separately funded.
But arguably, we could say
program,
that.
we could do away with a lot of that.
Right,
All these are is
arguably, it's not
patches
working.
to solve
Yeah.
bigger
Yeah, there's an
problems.
awful
It
lot
would
of
be work.
And maybe if we were
That's
spending
right.
more on
I mean, think
education.
about the
we
40s and
would
50s, you
spend
didn't
it.
have it all, right?
That's right.
Because people were working.
Oh, and pay them a decent
And pay 'em a
wage.
decent wage,
Who can
right.
pay, who can live on $7.25 an hour?
Yeah.
You can if you're gonna have the churches give them a little food, you're gonna have food stamps, you're gonna have housing through the city. I mean, you can't live very well, but you cobble up and that, you go to food pantries. We got all this other stuff we've created because we're good Christian or Judeo-Christian people. We're trying, but we're not solving the root problems. There's too much, there needs a redistribution of real dough.
They're not
So I
rational.
think we have to, I think
And there's plenty of money.
That's not the issue. That's plenty of money.
That's where it is.
we're
It's going.
supposed to
Yes.
reconvene, but.
Anyway,
Does anybody else have
don't
any?
give up.
I have cards, if anybody would like my information, you know, I'd be glad to talk with anybody, or, you know, even if you live in Iowa, I'll talk to you. You know.
No boy.
It's-
Yeah, you paid for